She doesn't even speak English. Just get her to smile and sign. That's all she's good for. The words sliced through the air like a dagger, followed by casual laughter from the head of the table. No one noticed the woman sitting silently at the far end, and no one cared that the young black waitress nearby had just heard every word. It was a private dinner on the 57th floor of a luxury hotel in downtown Chicago. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glittering skyline, while inside, the room pulsed with arrogance, power, and something even uglier, entitlement. 12 high-level executives, mostly white, mostly loud, gathered around a long oak table to finalize a tech acquisition worth $1.2 billion. Among them sat a woman in her late 50s, Yuriko Takashima. Japanese billionaire. Robotics visionary. Silent, composed, unreadable. To most of the men in that room, she was just another rich foreigner. Quiet. Out of place. Easy to manipulate. And so they ignored her. But what they didn't know was that someone else in the room was watching everything. Someone they had completely overlooked. A 25-year-old black waitress named Imani Carter. Slim. Sharp. Beautiful. Invisible. By design. She had learned early that black women in places like this weren't expected to speak, or think, or matter. Her job was to pour wine, clear plates, and disappear before anyone remembered her name. But that night, Imani saw something in the billionaire's eyes. A slicker. A fracture. A silent scream no one else could hear. And when the time came, it wouldn't be the CEOs or the translator or the polished attorneys who saved that deal from turning into theft. It would be Imani. This isn't just a business story. It's a black story. It's about the power of paying attention, the cost of being underestimated, and the courage it takes to speak up when silence is expected. If you've ever seen someone dismissed because of who they are or where they're from, keep watching. This story is for you. Imani moved quietly between tables, refilling glasses, adjusting napkins, and following orders barked at her through an earpiece by the banquet manager. Stay invisible, Greg had told her. No personality. No opinions. Just pour and go. And for the most part, she did. But tonight was different. From the moment Yuriko Takashima entered the room, the air had shifted. Not because of who she was. None of the American execs even bothered to greet her properly, but because of what she wasn't. She wasn't loud. She wasn't white. And she definitely wasn't fluent in English. She had arrived alone, dressed in a sleek, minimalist black dress, her silver-gray hair tied back in a perfect bun. She nodded respectfully to everyone she passed, even bowed slightly to the assistant who showed her to her seat. And then she sat in silence, the only woman at a table full of swaggering men. Her translator, a Japanese-American man in his 40s named Daniel, took the seat beside her. He looked nervous, almost as if he already sensed how the night would go. Blake Anderson, the lead investor, wasted no time setting the tone. Between sips of scotch and smug grins, he made a comment that made even a few of the guests shift uncomfortably. It'd be easier if she just nodded and smiled. That's all we really need, anyway. Candace, the only other female executive at the table, chuckled. A little mysterious silence never hurt a brand. Makes people think there's genius behind it. Yuriko didn't flinch. She stared down at her water glass as Daniel translated, but not word for word. He softened the insults, polished the edges, and left out the sting. Imani, standing just feet away, caught every nuance, every tone, every slight. And as a black woman in a world that often saw her the same way, as decoration, not substance, she felt the sting double. She wasn't the one being insulted directly, but she knew exactly what it felt like to be talked over, talked around, and talked about like you weren't even in the room. It wasn't just cultural arrogance. It was something deeper. A belief that power had a certain color, a certain sound, a certain language. And anyone who didn't match the mold was treated like a prop. And tonight, that belief was on full display. The conversation at the table rolled on, heavy with tech jargon, business buzzwords, and veiled condescension. Yuriko remained quiet, nodding politely, occasionally whispering something to her translator. Every time she did, Daniel's voice trembled slightly, as if he were translating not just language, but offense into something easier to swallow. Imani circled the room with her tray like a dancer hitting well-rehearsed marks. But inside, she wasn't calm. Her stomach twisted with every joke that poked fun at Yuriko's silence, every assumption that she didn't know what was going on. Imani knew better. Because Yuriko's eyes weren't lost. They were watching, measuring, calculating. And for the first time that night, those eyes turned toward her. It wasn't flaw. Just a glance. A second, maybe two. But in that moment, something passed between them. Not words. Not even expressions. Just understanding. It was the look you gave someone when you knew what it felt like to be underestimated. When you recognized the quiet kind of strength, the kind that didn't need to shout to be heard. Imani had seen that look once before, years ago, in Kyoto. She had been the only black woman in her graduate program, walking through a world where people stared at her like she didn't belong. But there was a woman there, a shopkeeper in a narrow alleyway, who looked at her the same way Yuriko just did now. With recognition. With respect. That memory hit her like a wave. Imani stepped back from the table and stood near the wall, pretending to check her tablet. But really, she was watching Yuriko now. Every breath. Every shift in posture. Every glance toward the contract folder that sat unopened near her plate. The billionaire hadn't touched it. Hadn't even asked for clarification. But Imani could feel it. Yuriko knew something was wrong. She just didn't want to show it. At the table, Blake cracked another joke about needing Google Translate for humans, and laughter followed. Imani watched as Yuriko blinked slowly, then turned her gaze toward the city skyline. She wasn't broken. She was waiting. And Imani, quiet, careful, invisible Imani, felt a pull in her chest. Not pity. Not anger. Something deeper. A knowing. Tonight, their silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. And if no one else was going to recognize it, she would. The wine had started to loosen tongues around the table. What began as casual conversation about global markets and tech integration quickly shifted into something meaner. Blake Anderson leaned back in his chair, one hand lazily cradling a glass of aged bourbon, the other gesturing toward Yuriko like she was a display piece in a museum. "You know," he said, his tone dripping with faux concern, "it's kinda wild. This whole negotiation would move a hell of a lot faster if she just spoke the damn language." Candace let out a high, sharp laugh. "Oh please, she understands enough. She just doesn't want to show her cards." Classic Eastern poker face. Mystery as strategy. "No," Blake countered. "I think it's simpler than that. She's just not used to being challenged. These kinds of dynasties, passed down power, zero accountability, makes it real easy to smile and nod while people like us do the real work." A few of the younger execs chuckled nervously. Some looked away. No one pushed back. Imani, standing just behind Candace's chair, felt her jaw clench. She wasn't just hearing disrespect, she was hearing dismissal. That kind of polished cruelty where people act like they're complimenting you, but every word cuts deeper than the last. Blake kept going. "She'll sign whatever we put in front of her. Let's be honest, this is a vanity deal for her. A legacy play. She wants her name on something global before she retires and fades into the background." The words hit Imani like a slap. Not because they were aimed at her, but because she'd heard versions of them before. About herself. About her mother. About anyone who didn't fit neatly into the mold of success defined by men like Blake. Candace added with a smirk, "Just keep smiling and nodding, Urizen. We'll handle the business side." Daniel, the translator, stiffened but said nothing. He translated a heavily edited version, skipping the parts that stung the most. Yuriko simply sipped her tea, her face unreadable. But Imani saw it. That tiny twitch in her eye. The way her fingers stilled over her lap. The faintest pause in her breathing. She wasn't just hearing them, she was absorbing it all. Letting them underestimate her. Letting the rope get longer. Letting them tie the noose themselves. And still, no one in that room noticed. Except the waitress they had all forgotten was there. Dinner was nearly over. The waitstaff began clearing empty plates, replacing them with polished dessert spoons and delicate ramekins of crème brûlée. But the real course, the one no one had ordered, was still to come. Blake tapped his glass lightly with a knife. The sound echoed through the quiet room like a bell at a boxing match. He reached into a leather briefcase at his feet and pulled out a thick folder, bound in navy blue, stamped with gold foil lettering. "All right, folks," he announced, standing like a showman ready for the final act. "Let's wrap this thing up." He walked around the table, dropping copies of the document in front of each guest. When he reached Yuriko, he laid the contract down with an exaggerated flourish. "Just the final details of our proposed partnership," he said with a grin. "Standard stuff. Everyone wins." Yuriko nodded slowly. She reached for the document, but Daniel, her translator, hesitated, clearly unsure whether to speak or translate. His fingers hovered above the cover, but he never opened it. Imani stood nearby, wiping down the edge of the buffet table, pretending to be preoccupied. But her ears were locked in. She caught a glance of the cover, Strategic Acquisition and Joint Management Proposal, in bold lettering. Harmless enough. But when Candace leaned over to whisper to the VP beside her, Imani leaned ever so slightly in. "It's airtight," Candace whispered, eyes flicking toward Yuriko. "She'll retain her title, sure. But we hold the voting shares, control the board, and lock in IP rights. She becomes a face, not a force." Imani's pulse quickened. That wasn't a partnership. That was a takeover in disguise. And judging by how confidently Blake and Candace smiled, they knew exactly what they were doing. The language in the contract was dense, legalese layered with ambiguity. On the surface, it offered mutual growth, shared innovation, and cross-cultural exchange. But buried deep in the middle was the real meat, a clause that shifted full operational authority to primary stakeholders representing the acquiring entity. Translation. Yuriko's billion-dollar robotics empire would no longer be hers. Imani swallowed hard. She had no right to intervene. No one in that room would listen to a server with a community college badge and calloused hands. But something in her gut twisted. This wasn't just business. This was theft, packaged in politeness, camouflaged by luxury, and sealed with a smile. And Yuriko, calm and dignified, still hadn't opened the folder. She was giving them rope. And they were wrapping it tighter with every word. The moment came quietly. No raised voices, no slammed fists. Just a line, dropped casually, carelessly, that made everything stop. Blake poured himself another drink, this time skipping the water. The room had mellowed, its sharp edges softened by wine and ego. Yuriko still hadn't signed. She hadn't even flipped open the contract. Blake leaned back in his chair and said, "You know, it's funny. You can put a billion-dollar company in the hands of someone who barely speaks English, and she still won't understand she's lost control." The laughter wasn't as loud this time. Some glanced toward Yuriko, then quickly looked away. Daniel froze in his seat. Imani stopped mid-step, her hand tightening around a carafe of sparkling water. She blinked, her breath catching in her chest. Blake continued, "We're not stealing anything. We're just doing what smart business people do, seeing opportunity in silence." Candace chuckled low under her breath. "Silence is consent, right?" That was it. Imani's hand trembled. She set the carafe down slowly, deliberately, and looked up, straight at Yuriko. And Yuriko was already watching her. Their eyes locked again, and this time, the connection was different. It wasn't a shared understanding. It was a quiet question. "Are you going to let this happen?" The room buzzed on, the laughter fading into low chatter, but for Imani, the noise disappeared. Her heart pounded like a drum in her ears. She remembered her mother's words from years ago, spoken after a teacher told Imani she was too intense for a black girl. "Baby," her mother said, "you don't shrink just because the room gets small." And this room had never felt smaller. Yuriko reached for her tea, her hands still steady, her expression unreadable. But Imani sighed. Not fear. Not confusion. Resolve. It was time. Imani turned toward Greg, the banquet manager, who was standing near the door, watching everything like a hawk. His eyes narrowed. He shook his head slightly. A silent warning. Stay quiet. Stay small. But Imani no longer could. Because this wasn't just about Yuriko anymore. It was about every deal done behind someone's back. Every voice ignored. Every seat at the table pulled away before someone different could sit down. And maybe, just maybe, tonight was the night that changed. Imani moved before she had time to think. 1 second, she was a shadow at the edge of the room. The next, she was walking, no, striding, toward the head of the table with quiet, controlled intensity. The kind of movement that doesn't raise alarms but commands attention. Heads began to turn. Forks paused mid-air. Conversations trailed off as the young black waitress stepped between the guests and the woman they had underestimated all night. "Excuse me, Ms. Takashima," Imani said clearly, her voice calm but firm. And then she did something no one expected. She bowed. A deep, respectful, traditional bow. Palms flat at her sides. Eyes lowered. A gesture of honor, not just to Yuriko's status, but to her personhood. The kind of gesture that said, "I see you." Gasps floated across the table. Greg, the banquet manager, took a step forward. "Imani," he hissed under his breath. "What do you think you're doing?" She didn't flinch. Still bowed, she spoke again, but this time in fluent, flawless Japanese. "Takashima-sama, they are deceiving you. This contract does not reflect partnership. It strips you of control." Yuriko's head lifted slightly. Her eyes locked on Imani's face like a radar finally picking up the signal it had been waiting for. In Japanese, she replied softly, "You speak my language?" Imani straightened, her voice steady. "Yes. I studied in Kyoto. And I studied you." Around the table, the Americans sat frozen. Blake's face flushed red. Candace's jaw dropped. One of the junior partners looked genuinely afraid. "What the hell is this?" Blake barked. "Get her out of here." Yuriko ignored him. She turned to Imani with a quiet authority that had been simmering beneath the surface all evening. "Show me." Imani picked up the contract from the table and turned it to the section she had seen earlier, the one buried in fine print. Her finger landed on the line that transferred majority control of all intellectual property to Blake's firm. "This is what they're hiding," she said in English now, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "It's not a partnership. It's a power grab." Silence fell like a curtain. Yuriko stared at the page for a long moment, then back at Imani. "Arigato," she said quietly, "for speaking when it mattered most." And in that instant, the entire room shifted. Yuriko Takashima stood. Slowly, calmly, like a storm gathering over still water. She placed both hands flat on the table, her posture perfect, her gaze steady. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, but it cut through the air like glass. "For hours," she said, her accent present but her English precise. "I have listened. And now, you will listen to me." Nobody breathed. Even Blake, for all his bravado, sat silent, jaw tight, eyes uncertain. "You assumed silence meant ignorance," she continued, eyes locked on him. "You assumed formality meant weakness. You spoke of legacy as if it were something shameful. But you forget, this company was not handed to me." Her voice rose slightly. "I built it." Her words hit with the force of a declaration, not a defense. From a 2-person robotics lab in Osaka to a global AI powerhouse. I built it while men like you laughed. While banks refused loans. While governments refused contracts. And I built it without sacrificing integrity. Candace opened her mouth, but Yuriko raised one finger. No. One word. Final. Sharp. The kind of no that ended conversations. You mock my English, yet I understood every word you said tonight. Every insult. Every lie. Every plan whispered like I was too old or too foreign to matter. Daniel, the translator, lowered his head in shame. Yuriko glanced at him, her tone softening. You tried to protect me. But protection is not what I needed. Respect is. She turned back to Blake. You brought a contract designed to strip me of everything I've built. You assumed I would sign without question. And perhaps I would have, if not for her. She nodded toward Imani. A waitress, she said, her tone making it clear the title was not one of dismissal, but of admiration. A stranger. The only one who saw what you tried to hide. Imani stood quietly, her hands folded in front of her, heart pounding. You thought you were playing a game, Yuriko said. But tonight, you lost something far more valuable than a business deal. You lost your reputation. You lost my respect. And most importantly, she picked up the contract, tore it cleanly in half, and let the pieces fall onto her untouched dessert. You lost me. For a full 10 seconds, no one moved. The sound of the torn contract landing on Yuriko's dessert plate echoed louder than any outburst. Her final words still hung in the air like smoke after a cannon blast. Then Blake exploded. This is insane, he shouted, slamming his glass down so hard it cracked. You're throwing away a billion-dollar opportunity over what? Some waitress's translation of fine print. Imani didn't flinch. Yuriko simply looked at him, calm and unbothered. I'm not throwing anything away, she said evenly. I'm removing a threat. Candace leaned forward, trying to salvage whatever control she had left. Let's all take a breath. This is a misunderstanding. We're here to build bridges, not burn them. Yuriko's eyes narrowed. You don't build bridges by burying landmines under them. Blake stood, towering over the table, his face a mask of fury. You don't get to lecture us. This is how the real world works. This is business. Yuriko rose again, this time matching his energy not with volume, but with poise. No, she said. This is exploitation, disguised as strategy. You assumed because I am quiet, I am unaware. Because I show respect, I lack power. And because she gestured to Imani, wears a uniform, she lacks value. Blake barked a bitter laugh. She's a waitress. Yuriko's voice dropped, like thunder right before a storm. And you are a fool. Gasps. Imani watched as every executive's face shifted, some with shame, some with fear, and some with the sick realization that they had backed the wrong side. I came here tonight out of respect, Yuriko said. I came prepared to sign. But instead, I leave prepared to expose. Candace's face went pale. You wouldn't. There are cameras, Yuriko said, motioning subtly to the corner. And witnesses. And phones. Her gaze swept over the stunned room. And now, there is a story. Imani stepped forward, still quiet, still composed. In America, she said, we call that going viral. Yuriko nodded slightly. Good. Let it. Blake's shoulders slumped, his anger collapsing into something smaller, something pathetic. You'll regret this, he muttered. Yuriko smiled for the first time that night. No. You will. The story broke before sunrise. A 30-second clip from a hidden phone camera surfaced on X, formerly Twitter. It showed Yuriko Takashima standing tall, her voice calm and firm as she declared, You thought you were playing a game. But tonight, you lost something far more valuable than a business deal. Within hours, the video had over 3 million views. By noon, the hashtags were trending. Hashtag respect over profit, hashtag Takashima truth, and the one that hit the hardest, hashtag Black Story, honoring Imani's courage. Corporate America watched in collective disbelief. Headlines exploded across financial news outlets. CEO walks away from $1 billion deal over racist, predatory tactics. Another read, Waitress exposes takeover plot in viral video. Blake's firm went into crisis mode. Investors began pulling out. Partners issued statements of concern and non-affiliation. A board meeting was called before lunch, and by evening, Blake Anderson was no longer CEO. Candace fared no better. A former intern leaked emails showing she had been mocking Eureka's language skills for weeks before the meeting. She was quietly removed from 3 boards and had her keynote at a Women in Leadership Summit cancelled without apology. And Greg, the hotel manager who told Imani to stay invisible? The hotel issued a public apology within 24 hours, and Greg's name vanished from the staff roster overnight. But not everyone suffered. Eureka's company stock surged. The world saw her not just as a brilliant mind in AI but as a global symbol of dignity and strength. Overnight, she became a voice in conversations about business ethics, power dynamics, and cultural intelligence. And Imani. She was no longer just a waitress. Her inbox overflowed. Offers from PR firms, interviews, speaking gigs. But one email stood out, a personal message from Eureka's office. The subject line read, an invitation. And the message was simple. We are building something new. Not just a company but a culture. A place where respect is not negotiable. Would you like to be part of it? Imani stared at the screen, hand over her mouth, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about rewriting the rules. Because arrogance may win the room for a night. But respect builds legacies that last generations. Imani sat at the edge of her small apartment bed, the sun casting soft gold over the hardwood floor. The morning air smelled like fresh coffee and something else, possibility. The night before, she had clicked reply. Her email back to Eureka's office had been short, respectful, and typed with trembling fingers. I would be honored. Now, less than 24 hours later, she was on a video call with Takashima's chief of global relations, a poised woman named Naomi Sato, speaking from a sleek Tokyo office filled with morning light and bookshelves lined with awards. Ms. Brooks, Naomi said with a gentle smile, Eureka-san was deeply moved by your courage. She believes you understand something many executives never will, that integrity cannot be taught, only shown. Imani swallowed hard, unsure if she should speak. Naomi continued. We're launching a new initiative, the Harmony Project. Its mission is to create ethical frameworks for international deals, especially between Western and Asian markets. Eureka-san wants you to lead our cultural empathy division. Imani blinked. Me. Naomi nodded. You. She said, find me someone who listens better than they speak. Someone brave enough to speak truth, even when it's inconvenient. That was you, Imani. The offer was extraordinary. A full relocation package to Tokyo. A 6-figure salary. Mentorship directly from Eureka. And a seat at the table. This time, not to pour water, but to shape policy. When the call ended, Imani sat still for several minutes, her mind spinning. She thought about all the times she'd been told to shrink. All the times her voice had been dismissed. All the quiet moments where kindness was her only rebellion. And somehow, that kindness had cracked something open. Imani packed slowly that night. Not just clothes, but memories. The uniform she folded one last time. The name tag she placed in a shoebox. The silent vow she made to herself. I will never let anyone else feel invisible again. By the time her plane landed in Tokyo, the city glittered beneath her like a promise. And standing at the terminal, waiting just past customs, was Eureka herself. No entourage. No assistants. Just a bow. And a smile that said, welcome home. 2 years later, Imani stood before a conference hall filled with leaders from around the world. CEOs, diplomats, educators, even activists. Behind her, a massive screen displayed just 4 words. Dignity speaks all languages. She took a breath and began. I used to believe that power came with volume, that whoever spoke loudest controlled the room. But that's not true. Power isn't always in words. Sometimes it lives in silence. And sometimes it rises when someone chooses to break that silence. The audience leaned in, not because she was shouting, but because her voice was steady, grounded. I was just a waitress, a black girl in a black uniform, told to disappear. I poured drinks for people who never looked me in the eye. And then one night, I saw something I couldn't ignore. And I spoke. She paused, letting that truth land. That one moment, born not from ambition, but from empathy, changed everything. She turned slightly toward the screen behind her, where images from that infamous dinner had faded into a new logo. The Harmony Project, now a global initiative across 17 countries. I stand here today not because I planned it, or because I was qualified on paper. I stand here because someone saw value in my voice when others saw only a uniform. Because one woman believed that integrity matters more than credentials. Her eyes scanned the room. And if there's anything I've learned, it's this. Dignity doesn't need translation. Respect isn't bound by culture. And kindness, when paired with courage, can rewrite history. She smiled, her final words landing like a quiet anthem. So wherever you are, whether you sit at the head of the table or serve from its edges, never forget your voice matters. Your presence matters. And sometimes, the smallest voice in the room is the one that saves it. The hall erupted in applause. And if you believe that stories like these deserve to be told, stories of quiet power, of unexpected heroes, of black stories that reshape the world, subscribe to Silent Triumph and join us on this journey. Because dignity speaks all languages, and every voice deserves to be heard.